In the early 19th century, England was undergoing one of the most transformative periods in its history. The wheels of the Industrial Revolution were turning in full force. Factory smoke rose like a dark fog over the grim cities that swallowed thousands of people migrating from the countryside. Victorian society, on one hand, took pride in progress, while on the other it was confronted with the dark side of this new world. On one side, science, industry, and imperial wealth. On the other, poverty, crime, disease, and the deep social chasm. In the streets, child laborers, families in misery, prostitution, and gang activity were commonplace. London functioned like a growing machine, but in the gears of that machine, the human spirit was crushed. Amid this dark atmosphere, a distinct contradiction permeated society. Science advanced, but so did superstition and irrational fears. As people entered the age of reason, they became more susceptible than ever to supernatural. Trust within society was weak. London's streets at night were dominated by fear. Rumors of night demons, ghost attacks, and diabolical figures reflected both the public's internal anxieties and the unease brought about by a rapidly changing world. In short, Victorian England was trapped between two extremes: scientific progress and superstition, wealth and destitution. In other words, rational thought and a culture of fear had merged. And it was this very contradictory atmosphere that created the perfect ground for the emergence of a dark figure like Spring Hill Jack. The Industrial Revolution had promised people a modern age, but it had also brought an enormous alienated society. Everyone was now alone in the crowd. As a nation grew, so did belief in invisible dangers. People began to explain the inexplicable with old fears. For the poor, Jack embodied the darkness of the streets. For the middle class, he was a reflection of the fear of the lower classes. Viewed as a kind of social paranoia, this interpretation was far from incorrect. Spring Hill Jack was not just a monstrous figure. He was the product of a cultural trauma born from the post-industrial world. He represented the fear ingrained in the subconscious of a mechanized, alienated society living in the shadows. In 19th century England, the media served a role similar to today's social media, spreading fear, rumor, and sensation. Especially popular among the working class were the penny dreadfuls, cheap horror stories sold for a penny, which made the Spring Hill Jack legend famous across the country. These publications were often exaggerated, bloody, and dramatic. Distorting the truth, they depicted Jack as a demon, a vampire, or a supernatural creature. Newspapers, noticing the public's fascination, followed the same strategy. Headlines like "The Leaping Devil Spotted Again in London" boosted sales. Each new report fanned the flames of rumor. Each rumor generated a new sighting. Thus, a fear-based cycle formed between the media and the public. People were terrified, but at the same time, this fear became a formula for entertainment. Jack masks were sold in the streets, and Gothic plays were staged above him. Fear had become a cultural phenomenon. Thus, Spring Hill Jack transitioned from mere rumor to one of the earliest pop culture icons of the 19th century. Much like today's internet legends, such as Slender Man, it became a societal nightmare amplified by media. Really, Only a few claimed to have seen him, but with each new report, he seemed to take on more form. People began to know what he looked like because newspapers reinforced his image with illustrations, witness accounts, and exaggerated stage depictions. Witness reports varied, but there were common traits. Jack was usually described in human form, but more than human, tall, thin, and agile. Some witnesses said he moved with a cat-like grace, others claimed he seemed to fly. His most distinctive features were his metal clothes that reached to his knees and eyes that glowed like flames in the dark. Some claimed he could spit blue or white fire from his mouth, earning him the nickname the Fire Spitter for a time. His clothing was usually black or dark and form-fitting. Some witnesses described it as a cloak resembling a raincoat, others like demonic armor. Many accounts mention a kind of emblem or shining metal on his chest. But the most striking feature, the one that inspired his name, was his ability to leap. Jack was said to spring onto the rooftops of two-story houses, vault over high walls, and sometimes fly over buildings. Some witnesses claimed to have noticed secret mechanisms in his use. Though accounts differed, one thing was clear. Spring Hill Jack was both human and supernatural. Reality and imagination, technology and magic were completely intertwined. Perhaps this is why escaping him seemed impossible. The first reported incident took place in 1837 in the Clapham area. A young man named Mary Stevens was attacked by humanoid yet strangely rescue creature while walking home from work along a dark street. The creature grabbed Mary, attempted to kiss her, scratched her face with its claws, and let out a strange laugh before disappearing into the darkness with an extraordinary relief. By the time people arrived in response to Mary's screams, the attacker had vanished. This event ignited the first major wave of public fear. Rumors were now beginning to feel real. A few months later, 18-year-old Lucky Scales had a similar encounter while working with her sibling. Spat blue flames at the woman's face. Lucy was temporarily blinded and collapsed to the ground. The attacker escaped by leaping over a high wall within seconds. This incident was considered proof of Spring Hill Jack's supernatural powers and also exposed societal and class anxieties. Jack typically targeted women returning home or alone, sometimes approaching disguised as a cloaked gentleman. Most attacks were directed at young female servants, the most vulnerable members of Victorian society. These events transformed Jack from merely a monster story into an urban legend intertwined with social fear and gender tension. Physical injuries were usually minor, but the psychological impact was significant. It became dangerous for women to walk alone at night. Patrols and public night watches were established. As newspapers exaggerated the events, Jack evolved from a single assailant into a ghostly figure haunting London's nightmares. To fully understand these events and the impression they left on the public, let us revisit some of the most notable reported incidents. Mary Stevens and Lucy Scales' encounters were among the first officially documented cases. Mary was the first recorded victim, while Lucy's consistent testimony and the attention of official authorities made the incident formally serious. On that evening, Lucy Scales and her sister were returning from their brother's home. They were passing through a narrow alley known as Green Dragon Alley. Around 8 o'clock, the weather was dark and foggy. Suddenly, they saw a tall, cloaked man appear before them. According to the sister's account, the man was silent, then without warning, he spat blue flames at Lucy's face. Lucy screamed and fell, temporarily losing her sight and experiencing violent convulsions. Her sister was paralyzed with fear. The attacker turned silently and vanished by leaping over a high wall within seconds. This incident was the first to be recorded with two consistent eyewitness accounts. The sister told police that the attacker had a tall, slender build, cloaked with a pale face that shone in the lantern light. Lucy's doctor noted that the patient experienced severe fear and shock. Her eyes were irritated by the flames, confirming that a real attack had occurred. The event reached the Mansion House, London City Hall. Lord Mayor Sir John Cowan officially described the attack as verified and serious in a public session. This marked the first time Jack was perceived not as mere rumor but as a credible threat even by authorities. Details of the case appeared in the Morning Chronicle, London, 1838, and the Illustrated Police News. Police investigations recorded the sisters' testimonies, later summarized in the Times. Though Mary Stevens did not sustain visible facial injuries. This case incident lent credibility to the earlier attack on Mary, suggesting that Jack's actions were indeed real. In February 1838, the first instance where the name Spring Hill Jack appeared in records occurred. The date of the event was documented in contemporary newspapers, including the Times and the Morning Herald, February 19, 1838. On the evening of February 19th, some sources record February 20th, Jane Alsop heard someone at the door at her family home. When she opened it, a man stood before her, claiming to be a policeman. "We have captured Spring Hill Jack. Bring me a light," he said. When Jane brought a candle, the attacker threw off his cloak in an instant and appeared terrifyingly before her. Witnesses described him wearing a helmet-like headpiece, a tight-fitting old skin coat, eyes glowing red like flames, and reportedly spitting blue-white fire from his mouth. Tucker stretched Jane with claw-like hands. She screamed, and her relatives rushed to her aid. The assailant leaped over a garden wall and escaped. The event was widely reported in the Times and other newspapers, drawing significant public attention. The attacker's statement, "We have captured Spring Hill Jack," indicated that he himself identified as Jack during the incident. Later in 1838, the Ashford case definitely showed that Jack targeted vulnerable individuals, particularly women. At the Ashford residence in Peckham, someone knocked on the door. A maid or household member went to answer and saw a person with a very ugly, strange face standing outside. When more people approached, the figure quickly fled. Historical accounts indicate that in some versions, it was a young servant who opened the door, screamed, and caused neighbors to appear, prompting strangers to escape. All accounts share a common theme. Young children or defenseless servants were typically the first witnesses. By 1843, in Limehouse, Cutthroat Lane, a notoriously dangerous narrow street, strange nightly movements were reported. On one occasion, a carpenter or worker, sometimes named Jones, in records acting as a night watchman, noticed a figure leaping forward with long strides. According to reports, the figure frightened several people, and when confronted, two other shadows appeared, creating chaos. The worker was injured or severely psychological effects. Other accounts claimed the figure suddenly leapt several meters forward and disappeared amidst screams. Local newspapers published headlines such as "Ghost Monster Spotted Again in Limehouse." These incidents eventually gave rise to the belief that Jack was not a solitary attacker but part of a group of aristocrats who frightened the poor for their amusement. While all of this was happening, The response from the police and the authorities was complicated. Initially, police units treated the matter as a prank. However, as incidents multiplied, Scotland Yard became involved. At the time, London lacked a modern investigative force. The Metropolitan Police had been established in 1829 but was still fragmented. The attacks occurred in different neighborhoods and involved different witnesses, creating a lack of coordination. Additionally, witnesses were often lower class women whose testimonies were not taken seriously. Some newspapers criticized police indifference. If this creature did not truly exist, why would the public be so afraid? The Morning Chronicle, March 1838. Despite this, no official arrests were made. A few young aristocrats were questioned as suspects, but lack of evidence led to their release. The issue was officially addressed when London's Lord Mayor, Sir John Cowen, took it up in February 1838. Based on newspaper reports and public petitions, Cowen stated at the Steel of London meeting, "I have received numerous credible statements regarding the existence of such creatures. For the peace and safety of the public, the matter must be investigated seriously." Common later announced rewards for those who had captured Jack, effectively launching an urban monster hunt. No concrete results were achieved, and no one has caught. There was no physical evidence. Still, Cowen's initiative elevated the case from a mere rumor to a phenomenon recognized by official channels. Aristocrat theory. Some contemporary observers and historians suggested a more worldly explanation behind the tales. The most popular theory proposed that Jack was actually a member of the nobility. The most commonly named individual was Henry de la Poer Beresford, the Marquis of Waterford. The Marquis of Waterford held a prestigious title within the Irish aristocracy, created in 1789 for the second Earl of Tyrone, George Beresford, an able Irish politician and extremely powerful rank. At the start of the 19th century, Henry de la Poer Beresford was known in London high society as an eccentric famous for his madness. His excessive drinking, violent tendencies, and public scandals earned him the nickname Mad Marquis. The public knew him for nocturnal rivalries and the cruel pranks. Historians have noted that early Spring Hill Jack incidents coincided with periods when Beresford was in London. Some newspapers reported that Jack used mechanical devices or chemical mixtures to frighten his victims. For example, alcohol and gas mixtures to produce fire from the mouth or spring-loaded boots to leap higher. These pranks are linked closely with Waterford's known interest. Some witnesses even claimed the attacker bore a symbol resembling Waterford's coat of arms. No conclusive evidence was ever found. When Beresford died in 1859, reports of Spring Hill Jack attacks continued, suggesting neither he was not the sole perpetrator or the legend had taken on a life of its own. For the public, the aristocratic prankster theory was plausible. Londoners believed that the upper class could intimidate the public with impunity. Thus, Spring Hill Jack became more than a monster, he was a symbol of class difference, fear, and injustice. Transition of popular culture. As Jack's identity remained a mystery, public panic was shaped by the attacks themselves. These events transferred the legend from an abstract rumor into a real threat in the public imagination. Newspaper ran fear-inducing headlines, people patrolled streets at night. Attacks began to be officially documented, and the public took measures to protect themselves, shaping the legend according to reported incidents. Between 1830 and 1860, people truly believed in Jack's existence. Newspaper reports of new attacks appeared frequently, and women and children feared venturing out at night. Jack became a symbol of London's dark streets and foggy nights. From 1860 to 19th, Jack entered a period of popularization. He became a figure of curiosity and entertainment, particularly through cheap horror publications called penny dreadfuls. These stories revealed Jack, portraying him as a gothic anti-hero or even a mysterious justice bringer. Some tales depicted Jack as a demon, others as a masked vigilante with supernatural powers appearing at night. In many ways, he became an early prototype of a superhero figure, foreshadowing characters like Batman or V for Vendetta. In the 20th century, Jack evolved further, appearing in plays, comics, and radio programs as a classic British horror figure. By the 1930s, Spring Hill Jack adventures appeared even in children's comics, transforming him from a fearsome creature into a folkloric character of integrity. Historians and writers began analyzing Jack's story through the lens of urban legend, social fear, and media influence. He was no longer just a terrifying entity but a reflection of the subconscious fears of English society. By the 20th century, Jack had evolved into an entirely new figure. Over time, he appeared in theater productions, comic books, and radio programs, becoming an iconic symbol of British horror. In the 1930s, Spring Hill Jack adventures were even featured in children's comics. He was no longer a figure that frightened the public but had become a folklore character told with curiosity and fascination. From the mid-20th century onward, historians and writers began studying his story through the lenses of urban legends, social fears, and media influence. Jack was not just a scary creature, he became a reflection of the subconscious fears of English society. Summary of transformation: demon, humanoid creature, technological marvel, urban legend, pop culture icon. This evolution also reflects the transformation of societal fears. Supernatural rural demons gave way to human-machine hybrid figures lurking in the shadows of cities. Jack became the very embodiment of those shadows. The penny dreadful culture provided a platform for his revival, but his presence in popular culture across generations kept the legend alive in England. In the 1980s and 1990s, UK-based publishers like Fleetway Comics and Dark Horse Comics released miniseries titled Spring Hill Jack. In these versions, Jack was portrayed as vigilante in Victorian London, combating supernatural creatures. He also appears symbolically or directly in works inspired by Alan Moore's From Hell and in comic series like Hellboy as one of the most original shadow figures of Victorian darkness. On television and digital platforms, Jack continued to appear. Numerous films and short features were produced under the title Spring Hill Jack. In 1904, early silent films, including The Curse of the Hobdevil, brought Jack to the silver screen. By the mid-20th century, British horror cinema, particularly the Hammer horror style, often featured long-cloaked, wall-leaping mysterious men in Gothic London streets, directly inspired by Jack. In modern media, series such as Doctor Who, Penny Dreadful, and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen reference Jack directly or indirectly, especially in Doctor Who post 2005, the diabolical leaping creature theme reflects Jack's enduring legacy. Today, Spring Heel Jack is a symbol of British horror culture, an emblem of the dark Victorian atmosphere, and constantly evolving mask of human fear of the unknown. What keeps him alive is not a single incident but the continuous collective imagination, like Dracula, Frankenstein, or Slender Man. Jack embodies humanity's instinctual fear of the unseen. In games such as Assassin's Creed Syndicate 2015, players investigate the curse of Spring Heel Jack in Victorian London. In The Order 1886, creatures sleeping across gaslit streets pay homage to Jack. Gothic games like Bloodburn or Darkest Dungeon incorporate long cloaks, strange moves, and hellish breath reminiscent of Jack's physical traits. Spring-heeled Jack. Once the by generation, today he is a legend. But who was he really? The public called him a demon. Newspaper wrote of him as a mysterious hero. In reality, Jack often merely frightened defenseless people, attacked women in the streets, and turned fear into entertainment. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is not what he did, but how popular he became. Throughout history, people have chosen to believe stories fed by fear. They forgot the real victims, yet the monster lived on. Perhaps Spring-heeled Jack's immortality lies in this paradox. We curse evil, yet cannot stop being fascinated by it. That is why Jack never fully disappeared, because we continue to applaud the darkness. We never truly learned who Spring-heeled Jack was, but perhaps that was never the question. Maybe Jack was never caught because he was never a real person. He was a reflection of our fears, rumors, and the moments we stared into darkness, unsure of what lay within. And perhaps that is why, for 2 centuries, a shadow continues to live in the dark, and its name is Spring-heeled Jack.